Alright, let's dive into one of the Foundation's more unsettling files, SCP-5007. This is a story about a terrifying anomaly that's been stalking Australia's Bass Strait for well over a century, leaving this trail of bizarre disappearances and, frankly, pure cosmic horror in its wake.
You know, the waters between Tasmania and the Australian mainland already have a pretty dark reputation. But we are not talking about simple accidents or rogue waves here. No, the stories coming out of this region suggest something way more sinister is at play. A force that is actively hunting people, right from the coastlines. And this is where it gets incredibly strange. This quote is from an eyewitness to the disappearance of Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt back in 1967. He said, Holt swam out towards these weird balloons floating near the cliffs. Balloons, he claimed, that had people inside them. Yeah, this was no weather balloon. This was a predator.
And if you think that sounds bad, the Foundation's official designation paints an even more gruesome picture. SCP-5007 instances are these horrifying fusions of human bodies, all meshed together with black tentacles. They just float silently, using grotesquely swollen stomachs filled with gas for buoyancy. The cold, clinical description is somehow even more chilling than what the eyewitnesses saw.
But here's the thing, this isn't a modern problem. When the Foundation started digging, they uncovered a pattern stretching back more than 100 years, linking all these historical mysteries to this one, single, horrifying anomaly. The timeline of its activity is just chilling. You've got the HMS Sappho in 1858, its crew mentioning giant balloons right before they vanished. Over a century later, Prime Minister Holt disappears under almost identical circumstances. And then, in 1978, the case of a pilot named Frederick Valentich gave us the most direct evidence yet. These are the last words anyone ever heard from Frederick Valentich's plane. He was just on a routine flight when he ran into something he just could not identify. You can hear the confusion and the sheer terror in his voice as he tries to describe this thing that was not an aircraft, just circling him before all contact was just gone.
Now, here's the kicker. Valentich didn't just crash into the sea. Years later, a Foundation drone found his plane, but it wasn't on the seabed. It was impossibly stuck, embedded in the solid rock wall of a deep-sea trench 1,200 meters down. This was the first huge clue that the victims weren't just being taken, they were being dragged somewhere deep. So that discovery lit a fire under the Foundation. They started actively hunting for the source, tracking these SCP-5007 instances, and it finally led them to the creature's lair, a remote, totally anomalous reef right in the middle of the Bass Strait. This quote, man, it perfectly captures the Foundation's grim determination. A mobile task force team was tracking an instance that had just snatched 6 people from a fishing boat, and they refused to intervene. See, their mission wasn't rescue, it was to watch, to understand the entire life cycle of this horror, no matter what it cost. And what they saw was just awful. The victims were dropped onto this reef that was crawling with other weird creatures. Seeing no escape on land, they did the only thing they could think of. They jumped into a large pool in the center for safety, only to be pulled under one by whatever was lurking in the depths. There was no escape. So, from this horrific observation, the Foundation identified 2 key parts of this thing's habitat. First, the reef itself, which they called SCP-5007-A. It's made of a rock that grows at an impossible rate, and right in its heart is SCP-5007-B, that deep-sea pit, the very source from which these creatures were crawling out of. Okay, so understanding that pit was now priority number 1. After losing a bunch of unmanned drones, the Foundation built a special submersible, one tough enough to handle insane pressures, and sent a D-class personnel on what was basically a one-way mission to the bottom. At 5,800 meters, way deeper than any normal trench should be in that area, the pilot, D-5007-98, starts seeing things that just should not be there. The walls are lined with these weird tendrils, and he's passing the wreckage of all the previous drones they'd lost. You can just hear the growing dread in his audio log. He starts seeing human remains, mangled but somehow preserved, just floating in the dark. The crushing pressure outside is nothing compared to the psychological pressure building inside as he realizes how utterly wrong this place is. Then, at 6,700 meters, things go from bad to an absolute nightmare. The sub enters this vast, suspended graveyard, a thick cloud of crushed human bodies,
all of them impossibly preserved and, horrifically, still alive. The pilot's terror just boils over when he realizes the mangled remains, including a face they later identified as Prime Minister Harold Holt, are all trying to communicate. They're not attacking him, they're warning him. They're all mouthing the same two words: go back. But it's too late. A massive tentacle, meters wide, just erupts from the darkness below. It grabs the sub, and all attempts to escape fail. The pilot's not in control anymore. He's cargo, and he's being pulled down, deeper and deeper into the abyss. The onboard computer logged a final depth of nearly 18,000 meters. Now, to put that in perspective, that is almost twice as deep as the Mariana Trench. It's a geographical impossibility. Whatever is down there lives in a space that completely defies our understanding of the planet. A lot of the final footage from that descent was corrupted, and what was left was classified as an info hazard, basically too dangerous for anyone to see. But the final, recovered frames, they revealed something that shattered everything they thought they knew. At the bottom of this impossible pit, the submersible's camera was filled with a single colossal eye, an eye over half a kilometer wide, just staring back. This was the source. This was the true anomaly, SCP-5007C, a sentient being of incomprehensible size, just dwelling in the crushing dark.
So what do you do when you find a subterranean, possibly planet-sized intelligence? Well, if you're the Foundation, you decide to try and put a lid on the abyss.
The plan was simple. It was logical, and it was unbelievably arrogant. They built this massive, reinforced seal, dropped it over the mouth of the pit, and basically declared the problem solved. They really thought they could just close the door on it. The response was immediate, and it was terrifying. Just hours after the seal was in place, every single person at the monitoring site got an email. The sender? A researcher who had died years ago exploring that very pit. The message had just two words: found you. The aftermath was a catastrophe. An investigation team found the monitoring site in ruins, literally destroyed by the giant seal that was supposed to be containing the entity. The staff weren't dead, they'd been transformed, their bodies covered in newly grown, pulsating eyes. And coiled inside the main chamber was a massive tentacle from SCP-5007C. It had simply reached up from its prison and taken back its territory. You see, the containment failed because they completely misunderstood what they were dealing with. SCP-5007 isn't just a monster in a hole. It's a conscious, vast intelligence that has been watching us from below for centuries. It knows we're here, and after being poked, you have to wonder, what happens when it decides it wants a better look?